we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
I woke up to the sound of someone screaming. I couldn't understand the words, but it didn't matter. The sound itself was disturbing enough. And as I opened my eyes and the sights and the sounds and the smells came flooding back in, I realized once again where I was. I was in Durango jail, part of Sheriff Joe Arpaio's Maricopa County system. But how did I get there? It's a very good question. It was a question I was asking myself, and it's a question that I'm going to answer for you today, but it's a long story. My name is Shane Watson. I am a mental health educator. I am a recovery peer support. I am a husband and father, and I'm an individual 13 years in long-term recovery from addiction and alcoholism. Brian, I'm glad to be here today.
Yes, sir. Thank you, buddy. I'm gonna say right off the bat, I'm going to try not to get distracted from the background. For those listening, and the cool thing is like on Spotify and stuff now, you can actually watch us talking or on YouTube or whatever. But if you're just listening to this for the audio part, the backdrop, my man has an entire wall of records. And I would assume those are 1,000 or 2, or I don't even know if you got a count.
3,500. It's a sickness at this point. It is safer than drugs. It gets me in a whole lot less trouble than drugs. It's not necessarily cheaper than drugs were, though.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like trying to do the math. Like I don't even know what a collection like that would cost, because I'm quite sure you've got like some golden ones in there from back in the day.
Discogs. So I catalog all my stuff on a website where you can buy and sell records, because I do buy and sell on there. It's called Discogs. It puts the median, I would say median value is about 37,000. That's based on condition and different things like that. High-end value is, I think, around 107,000. Now, I bought most of this for pennies on the dollar. I started really buying records in earnest in 1996 when people were abandoning their record collections. Everybody wanted CDs. People were like, records sound awful and they're crackly and whatever. And I snapped them up. I was a college student with not much money, and I found a used record store where I could go buy things dirt cheap. And that's where a whole lot of this came from.
So almost like buying stocks. Like you knew, all right, I'm going to buy now. Because probably, I mean, I know I did the same thing. I bought records back then, growing up in that age of probably late 80s, early 90s, where most bands that I liked were putting everything out on vinyl while everybody else was switching, bands are switching to CDs because of the major record labels. But even the older generation, like my mom's friends and parents, their generation, they were dropping, dollars to get like old Beatles records and Eagles and stuff. So
that's right up here. Yep. I inherited my father's collection. Unfortunately, he passed a couple of years ago from cancer. And he had original Beatles, Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis. I mean, like the foundation of rock and roll. And so I inherited his collection. I bought the used ones I told you about. And then I had a cousin who moved every couple years to a new house. I helped him move 5 times. Every time he moved, he felt like moving fewer and fewer records. So he'd hand me a stack and be like, here, keep these. And I gladly did that.
Yeah. My dad used to, he had a bar at one point, like right before I was born. Like, so you're talking like, we'll just say back in the day, but he kept all the 45s out of there. So he had some of like the original pressings of stuff from Righteous Brothers, Billy Stewart, Otis Redding, Sam Cooke. And so growing up, that's what we would do, is listen to those old 45s and stuff. And then the LPs and stuff that, my mom had as well. My brother got all those records, which is good because he's a huge music fan too. But so now you mentioned college earlier. So walk me through that, because I think that you had some stuff going on your college years, right?
As far as the story that I said, how did I end up where I ended up? It's interesting that you mentioned college, because that's when my use or misuse or abuse really took off. I started in junior high out of curiosity and mild peer pressure, stealing alcohol from my parents, things like that. It gained some steam in high school, smoking weed back in the 90s. But college, right around the same time when I started getting into vinyl, is when the floodgates opened for me. I was in a dorm. I lived in a dorm, and there was somebody, a student athlete that lived in that same dorm as me. And he had had an injury and had sports surgery for the injury. And he had been prescribed opioid painkillers for that injury. He didn't like how they made him feel, and I knew exactly how they made me feel. So I told him, I said, I'll buy that off you. Like, I'll buy that whole bottle from you. Keep in mind, we're talking about the 90s here. It's not like now where they prescribe 3 to 5 days at a time, very carefully. If somebody wants a refill, they need to go see their doctor, as it should be. But it was like you would get 30, 60, 90 days worth, 120, like just some ridiculous amount, and they would write refills. And so when I finished that first bottle, I went back to him and I said, see if you can get a refill. I mean, I'll pay you even more this time. And as you probably know from your work in law enforcement, I certainly know from my work in mental and behavioral health and my personal experience, when it comes to opioids, it does not take very long to go down that path of dependence. What that opened for me was the floodgate of addiction, to where I went from being a child back in my grade school and junior high years who was a straight A student, played sports, went to church, Boy Scout, to somebody within a few years of college graduation. Yes, I graduated. Don't ask me how. Actually had a fairly decent GPA. To being someone that was struggling a few years out from college with cocaine, crystal meth, and heroin, which were 3 drugs I promised myself I was never going to do. And there I was that person whose life was being run by these things that I told people not in a million years would I ever do that.
So, and in the drug world, sometimes, and even like drug cops and family members that are dealing with relatives with addiction, is it that you're using coke and meth in the same time frame, or you're saying coke for a few months and then getting into meth, or what?
There was a lot of overlap. So I was what they called the poly drug user, like pretty much anything that was available. People would ask me at the time, what do you use? Like, what's your thing? And I would quote, you're a music fan. I would quote Alice in Chains' Junkhead. And I would say, what's my drug of choice? Well, what have you got? I mean, it kind of like half jokingly, but half seriously. So to answer your question, there were points where there was a period of time where this was my thing, this particular thing. The majority of the time, there was overlap between them. There was a time in 2005, probably the closest I've ever come to dying, where I was wearing a fentanyl patch, eating the gel out of another fentanyl patch to get past the time release mechanism, which is insane, while doing cocaine, while drinking whiskey. So you've got a depressant here in the fentanyl, you've got a depressant in alcohol, and you've got a stimulant in the coke or meth or whatever I was doing at the time. And I mean, that night was an incredible story where all these crazy things started happening, and I realized I was dying. I looked at a phone next to me on the table on the desk in the room I was in, and this voice of reason is like, you need to call 911. And then the voice of addiction shouted that down and said, no way. Because if the ambulance comes, you've got paraphernalia all around the house. You're not going to be able to clean it up in time. And then law enforcement's going to come, and then your family's going to find out, and you're not ready for them to know. And so I was willing to risk rolling the dice on dying just to not have people know. And you know what? Everybody knew at this point. People could see it in me that I was struggling. And the insanity of addiction is that when all the crazy symptoms that were making me consider calling 911 went away 3 hours into this event, 5 minutes after the last symptom went away, I grabbed that bag of Coke and I started doing more. And that is that is truly, literally, genuinely insane. And I can say that now through the clarity of recovery, but in that moment, it made perfect sense to me. And that is terrifying.
Yeah. I had an informant one time, like talking to another person on the phone, trying to do a deal, all that crap. But sitting there and the other person was trying to figure out how to take like a pill of oxy and then like not even whatever you want to call it, like liquefy it and then try and shoot it, try to mainline it. And so the source is sitting there telling this person, and this is how he talks. He's like, you can't do that. It's going to coagulate in your veins like a blood clot, and you're going to freaking die. But then the person's like, But you're saying it can be done. Like
Yeah.
it didn't matter,
That's
right?
what they hear.
And that's
Yep.
what the team, we're sitting there going, no wonder. Like here
Oh,
we
yeah.
are, and this is an overarching conversation I used to have about the whole war on drugs and drug strategies with drug units. And we're buying oxy and at the time, a little bit of meth here and there, but a lot of oxy, a lot of heroin, and still a lot of coke and crack. But my thing was like, here we're dealing with this person who can get us whatever. And they're having a conversation, and this person on the other end of the phone trusts what the source is saying. And the source is telling them this is going to kill you if you try and do it. But you're saying it can be done like that.
That's what they heard. So you're saying there's a chance.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
And so that was the thing too, that I'm sure, eventually, you saw it, you're in recovery, but the advent of Narcan and other substances like that are saving lives.
Yes.
And at the time I was on an intel unit, and I'm trying to explain to higher ups, our overdoses are tripling and quadrupling. And our city was not known necessarily as a hub for heroin or at the time as fentanyl was starting to be used to step on heroin, so that the dealers can make more money off the product. We weren't a strong hub in that sense. There was an area close by that was, but it was like, no, our numbers are quadrupling because our officers are carrying Narcan. And I think at the time EMS and maybe fire as well. It's like, so the person that was so far along in their addiction that an overdose would have killed them, Narcan's bringing them back. And they're still chasing. It's not like the majority, at least in my experience, the majority of people that were overdosing were not then seeking help afterwards. It's almost like that. Yeah, it's like the foot's on the gas pedal. Like, I need to find some more of that. Like that was good.
And so then the question is, you have to ask, okay, then what will it take to get you to stop? Because I have met people who have had their children taken away from them, and it didn't get them to stop. I met someone at a place where I lived for a while in my early recovery called the Phoenix Dream Center. There was a pastor there that was missing one of his arms. He had gotten infected so bad from IV drug use, he had his arm amputated. That didn't get him to stop. So it's incredible to look at what it's going to take from one person to the next. You would think, especially people who don't use drugs or people who have that clarity would think, if something nearly killed me and I had the miracle of being brought back and given another chance, that would make me not want to do it. But that is how just pernicious and evil, and it just fully sunk its claws in you, addiction is, to where people are not thinking rationally. Even someone who years prior, when they weren't drinking or using or beforehand, made great decisions, you're dealing with somebody completely different than that person by the time they are down the path of addiction.
Yeah, I think too, when things do happen like that, like the person, lost their arm or any other horrible setbacks, it's almost like then that cycle speeds up in the sense of, well, now I'm just more destitute, or now I'm, like, it's sort of like when you talk to people about saving money, and how if you have, say, $500 saved up, it's almost like you feel like now you want to save more money because it's building up. Whereas maybe once you hit rock bottom with the addiction, it's like, I don't have anything else. Like, I don't have a job anymore I got to worry about, or now you're taking my kids, it's like, so boom, like I don't care anymore. I'm going to find out who's got the hot batch, and then I'm going to go buy some of that.
And that's where hope is so important for what I do with my peer support, working with men in recovery or men who are looking to be in recovery, men who are still actively using. You got to give them the reality of what the drugs are doing to them. Help them look and see for themselves what they've lost and what they're losing, present tense. But you have to give them a little bit of hope, because otherwise, like you said, if they see no hope and everything's lost and everything's going to be, and I'm never coming back from this, they will continue to seek that next bag, and they'll get very self-destructive. maybe even consciously. Maybe up to that point, they've only been self-destructive in terms of subconsciously. But maybe in that moment, they're announcing out loud to themselves, like, man, I'm just done with this. I'm never coming back from this. I'm going to ride this train till it crashes. And so that's where I think it's important for people like me. And I'm not unique. I mean, there's countless people out there that are in recovery, that we share our stories so that those that are caught up in it right now can see, no, you can come back from this, because I was convinced there at the end. I'm never going to have anything resembling a normal life. I'm never going to have happiness. I've caused too much damage to ever repair. And within 1 year of quitting, when I hit my 1 year recovery date, I was getting hired at a job that allowed me to find the field I'm in now, my dream job. My marriage was being restored, and I was a few weeks away from my daughter being born, who, you know, my wife and I intentionally did not have kids for a number of years, because the one good decision I did make when I was caught up in all that insanity was, I don't want a child to suffer because dad doesn't have his act together. And then when I did get my act together, things fell into place. And again, my daughter was born like a week or two after my 1 year sober date.
Man. And now growing up, were you around drugs? The reason I say is, like, it sounds like you had enough self-awareness. Hey, I want to be a solid parent. I want to be stable. What was your childhood like in that sense? Were you around drugs and alcohol, like at a young age? Did you have a stable family?
My childhood was incredible. My dad worked for the Phoenix Fire Department. My mom was a small business owner. And I did not grow up in an environment of drug use. I did not grow up in a traumatic environment. My parents had a very loving marriage right up until the time my dad passed. You know, somewhere around 50 years of marriage. And my childhood was like amazing Christmases with my family, going camping with my dad, going on shooting trips with my dad. Like, it was incredible. And so none of it came from that. They taught me not to do that. You know, where that first seed was planted was in junior high school, when I was going through really vicious bullying at the hands of some of my classmates. And I didn't like myself very much. I didn't have very much self-confidence and self-identity. And the first time I drank was around a friend from school, trying to impress him. And the problem is, the first time that I drank, that feeling made me go, you know what? Wow, I don't feel so bad about myself all of a sudden. Like, did I find a solution here? Is this the answer? And the problem is, when you're set in 7th grade, which is when I took that first drink, you don't understand. You're not opening the door to a solution. You're opening the door to an even greater problem, you know? And then in high school, when drinking became more frequent, that opened the door for the next substance. When that became more frequent, it opened the door for the next substance. Nobody wakes up one day and randomly starts doing heroin. They get there one step at a time and one choice at a time. And it can be very gradual and it can be very subtle. But no, those influences did not come from family. They came from a variety of places along the way. I mentioned peers, but I also looked up to a lot of bands that were very immersed in drug and alcohol, just flaunting it. Jim Morrison in high school, I became such a huge Doors fan. And I was like, I want to be like that guy. And, you know, those types of things. Now, do I blame my decision to use these things on the bands I listen to? No, I made my choices. My choices are mine. And I don't attribute that to my peers or to the music I listen to or anything. I made those choices. But if we're looking back at what planted some seeds, and I do that now because I also work with families who have preteens and teens, what are those influences that start that thought process? Those were some of the big ones for me in those early years.
Yeah, I can remember when I first started really paying attention to music. It was probably 2nd and 3rd grade, and it was all old soul music, beach music, you know, to the point where, and I've told this joke before, but I think I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, and that was when it kind of dawned on me that bands like the Drifters, you know, were not pop music for everybody else. Like, kids didn't know that music. I thought, because I always heard it in my house, like that was
your peers were not listening to the Drifters. That was me too, because I was the 7th grade kid, you know, when everybody else was listening to like Bon Jovi or Roxette or something. I was listening to things that my classmates were like, what is this? Like, I've never heard of this. Who is it they're listening to?
Hmm. Yeah, when I got into heavy metal in like fourth grade, it was because of my older brother. But that, like, when you're talking about like the drug use and stuff, everything was like at that time it was either coming out of heavy, like, devil worshiping kind of era where a lot of metal bands were, trying to shock everybody with that stuff, and I couldn't really relate. I couldn't really relate too much with sorcery and
Yeah.
stuff. It just wasn't my thing, and I couldn't like get all that excited about any other kind of music where bands are talking about like getting drunk or high or whatever. It just, to me at that age, I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm like 9 years old. I can't really relate. And then when I heard punk, I was like 10. It was like
That's
Minor
it.
Threat,
There it
Suicidal
is.
Tendencies, and that was where the light bulb went on.
Yep.
Like, I can't get enough of this music and skating and all that. It was like, I dig this, and I was fortunate, and people know I talk about it on the show a lot, but I was fortunate that I never went down the path of alcohol or drugs, even though it was readily available. Almost everybody I hung out with, everybody I grew up with, were, everybody drank, everybody smoked weed. That was just kind of a, like, weed and alcohol to me are the same thing in that sense. It was like the way people were using it. But then, of course, in the later teenage years, started seeing a lot more heavier drug use,
Yep.
and people really getting into addiction, and some were dropping out of school and stuff. But when you're talking about music, I don't know. I always like gravitated towards music that did have some kind of message, even like in the early days of hip hop and stuff, where that's what it was about, was like social change.
It was a message. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's like just and not freebasing cocaine and stuff.
Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, like, it
Yeah.
was. I look now in recent years, like I remember, like when I forget who it was, Notorious B.I.G. or Puffy, somebody came out with "Mo Money, Mo Problems," and it was like, how did we get here from what Chuck D was saying, where
Yeah.
it was like a newspaper, it was like, here
Yeah.
is what's happening where I'm from. But you said something. I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
As somebody that works in prevention and youth mental health, you said that you grew up and your friends were drinking or smoking weed or whatever. Obviously, you didn't do it. What
Mhm.
allowed you to have the self-identity and self-confidence to be around them, hang out, still have them as your friends, not abandon the friend group, but
Mhm.
not give into that? Was it the way that you were raised? What is that allowed you to not do that?
It actually, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to my mom, who I live with, and then my brother and I will go see my dad, every other weekend. I don't mean disrespectfully to them raising me for like not drinking and stuff, because they did. I mean, both of them worked, put food on the table, but they like drinking beer, and that's what they did all the time. I never necessarily, I didn't have to like fight an urge to do it or want to do it. I mean, my dad would give me beer when I was like 8 or 9 years old. You know what I mean? Like, just like,
That was
here
back in
you
the
go.
day. Having a
Because
sip was pretty
he was,
normal.
yeah, he was a bachelor. And you had tap water. He wasn't buying Pepsis and Cokes. He's like, here you go, and you just take a swig off of a Coors or Schlitz or something. But by the time like I was 10 and 11 and had the opportunity, or 12 or whatever, I give a lot of credit to Minor Threat. It's like Minor Threat was, singing
Ian,
about, yeah, not doing
straight
drugs,
edge.
and yeah, and just like this,
Yes.
and this straight edge scene was starting to really emerge outside of DC and
Love
New
it.
York. So it was
That's a
like one of
great
those things.
reason.
Yeah, yeah. It just I mean, I was reading the lyrics, yeah, because anybody, if you stop right now or later, you go and listen to Minor Threat. Sometimes you're not going to understand the words because the energy is so fast.
Yes.
But the lyrics are in all the tapes, back then, the records. So I could read the lyrics. And then it was like, oh man, like I like being good. Like, I don't want to get in trouble.
That's cool.
And also, but these guys are also singing about all these social issues that were just kind of opening my mind. But the whole idea of not drinking and doing drugs, and we rented because there was a bunch of kids. There was all these like kids that we were all from similar backgrounds with divorced parents and stuff. And we were all into skating. And my mom was so cool. She would let everybody come hang out at our house. So that's where 8, 9 kids come piling in the house. And somehow we rented Another State of Mind, which is an old documentary. I mean, I think it was filmed in 81 or 82. And it took a while to really kind of build a following. But this camera crew goes on tour with Youth Brigade and Social Distortion. And as they're touring, they hit Washington, D.C. area, and they hang out at the Discord house, and they're hanging out with Minor Threat, and there's footage of, Minor Threat playing. And Ian, and if I remember right, Henry Rollins is on there. I could be wrong about Henry, but I know Ian was definitely on there. And that's what he's talking about. He's like, hey, we follow the rules. We question government and things that we need to question, but we're just not going to screw up our minds. Like, we want to stay sharp, and we don't want to kind of become beholden to these substances or whatever. However he worded it. But man, that always kind of resonated to me. So even as I got a little bit older, like 15, 16, 17, 18. So like when I was 18 and joined the Army, had my 18th birthday at basic training. Like when I got to my unit, dudes were like, yeah, like you get drunk. That's what we do. We drink. I'm like, no, not me. Like, y'all can try that. Like, they're like, oh, we'll hold you down and pour it in your throat. I'm like, okay. And you got to sleep at some time. And I had already decided, like, if this happens, I will make note of who is doing what. And when they go to sleep, or just straight up one-on-one, like we're going to fight, or
we'll take care of it.
Yeah. Like,
we'll go out past the tree line.
Yeah. Because my worst fear really was, if I started drinking or ever doing drugs, like that, I would become a full-blown alcoholic or addict. And I saw some of that in my family and friends and stuff growing up. And then when I was in the Army and seeing like 18 and 19-year-old guys getting drunk every weekend, and then it started getting to be every night. And it's like, hey, you guys, like we're getting up tomorrow morning doing 25-mile road march. You know what I mean? Like, and you're still drinking at 3 a.m. Like, this is not good. So when you fall out tomorrow, and potentially have a life-ending injury, you know what I mean? Like, just it was always these eye openers throughout my life. And then after the Army, I went to college, and that was just studying and working at UPS. I was older. I had already been a sergeant in the Army. So there, younger people are always partying and all that. I didn't.
Oh yeah.
I looked at college as a job. And so I was paying for it, or I should say the Army was paying for it. So you resisted
drinking and using in the 3 high pressure environments: junior high, being a kid around your buddies, the military, which is like the drinking tradition is like the environment. It's just known for that. And then in college. So like that's, people can learn from you and the resolve that you have and whatever set that foundation, because you're the kind of person that can go and tell young people it is possible because I did it. Because people assume, oh, I'm in junior high, I'm supposed to experiment. It's a normal part of growing up. I'm in the military. It's a normal part of this. I'm in college. I'm supposed to party. I'm a college student. So your story shows the example that it is entirely possible to not do that.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was really young, I got a sweet tooth, man. I don't play around, man. Like, I went years and years, like killing some sweets, like Little Debbie snack cakes and stuff. But when I was a little kid, I say little, like young, but making that connection with, well, I didn't know how much I loved, ice cream until I tasted it. And now I love ice cream. You know what I mean? So I kind of just always kept that in the back of my head too. Like, if I don't ever start something, I won't get addicted. Now let me back up too, though.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting at a young age when you are exposed to things, and we were all kind of, my generation, ours, we're kind of close in age, but man, I feel like I might have you by a decade or so. So I don't know, but
like as in younger.
Yeah, I think no, older.
Oh.
Older. Oh, we'll compare notes.
I'm just curious. I'm gonna ask you then. It's how old do you think I am?
I'm putting you about 35 34-ish, 35 maybe.
I turned 50 in October.
That's what I'm talking about,
1975. Huh?
Really?
Yes.
That's
Yep.
outstanding, man. Good job, dude.
Hey, that's the genetics. I thank mom and dad for that. That's I got lucky. As a matter of fact, I had a chiropractor a few months ago guess just about the same age that you guessed.
Yeah, man. I would have. I was trying to, when we were talking earlier, I was like trying to. Okay, I'll give you a little secret, and people listening, you can pick up things on people, artifacts or whatever, like things on their clothing that tells you something about their background.
Cultural references. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And so just instinctively, I've always done that. And I did a lot in the police world.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like, I was trying to, I'm like, man, what I'm seeing is maybe mid-30s tops. But then I'm like, I don't know. I think I see a DI shirt. I don't know.
That's exactly what you see. Yes.
So when I saw the DI shirt, I'm like, hold on, man. Like, but he's a music fan, so it's possible. But yeah, dude, hey, that's also, you're right. Good genetics, but also I think stress, obviously, drug use and severe alcoholism. And I think lack of exercise and focus for people as they do get older.
Yes.
It starts to show so much. Like I joke about it a lot. But I do feel like at this stage that I'm, in my early to mid 20s physically. That's how I feel. I have that level of energy. I don't know. It's just, I think stress and the abuse of foreign substances and lack of exercise. Now, I know I'm jumping around a little bit. You went through a program. Am I right about that? Went through a program that was pretty disciplined.
I'm going to answer that, but I want to mention one more thing before I forget. As far as exercise, other than my faith, I would say exercise is the biggest thing. Well, I would say faith is number one. Family is number two. Mm-hmm. Other than those two, exercise is the main thing that allows me to stay sober, but still feel good, still get that dopamine release, still feel happy. And then right after that, I would say every day I sit in the sun for an hour and I read books.
Yes.
And it's, I understand that the era we live in now, people say that's not good for you. And that's a whole other debate for a different day. Yes, direct sunlight for an hour every day. What that does for my mood, for my circadian rhythm and being able to fall asleep more easily at night. I mean, that's huge. But your exercise thing, with me coming up on 50 years old, I'm glad that I am in the habit of exercising anyway. But I am coming up into those years with my body. Let's say there's a region I'm not working out. I'm coming up into those use it or lose it years where if you don't make a point to train this part of yourself and keep this trained, you're going to start seeing that drop off. Back to your question, as far as the program. So the first time I got sober was in 2005. Obviously with me saying that I'm 13 years in recovery, that didn't stick. I would be coming up on quite a bit. I'd be 20 years this year. I originally got sober. I actually self-intervened, believe it or not. I sat my family down and told them I had a problem. It was like a reverse intervention. I called them together. I'm like, I need to tell you guys, like, I'm struggling with this, what was kind of funny is they were kind of all like, yeah, we know. Yeah, I mean, It was obvious at that point. So I went to a really amazing treatment center in Phoenix called Calvary Center, and they were phenomenal. Great place. And I immersed myself just full speed into recovery. And I came out of there gung-ho, and I stayed sober for, I think, probably close to a year. The problem was I got complacent. Life started getting stressful. And the thing that's led to the relapse for me every single time is the same thing. It's not, I want to go do heroin again. I want to do coke again. It's, you know what? I can have a beer. I can have one beer, and I'll just leave it at that. And could I do that? Yeah, for a day or two. But then eventually it's going to become 2. It's going to become 12. It's going to become 24. And that's when you're like trying to think of your old dealer's phone number and you're off and running. So, so Calvary Center in 2005 is how I originally got sober. Now, this last time, when I came out of jail, my family were like, my wife's like, you ain't staying here. My family's like, you're not parents. You're not staying with us. No, because they had heard the word sorry a million times and they had not seen the change with it. So they're like, yeah, we know you're sorry. Go show us some action first. So I moved into a place in Phoenix called the Phoenix Dream Center. Now, don't let the name fool you. It's harder than jail in most aspects. In jail, you can lay in your bunk all day. Dream Center, we were up every day at 4 a.m. on the bus by 4:15, taken to go work out, run through a workout by a former pro rugby star, Fred Acoy, who did the workout that we called it the Drop Dead Fred workout. People were puking. Run us through a workout. Then you're back to the Dream Center. You're going to church. You're going to classes. You're doing labor. You're doing maintenance. You're doing homeless outreach. Your entire day is scheduled for you until 11 p.m., lights out, rinse and repeat, start again at 4 a.m. the next day. And it was very rigidly structured, and they have to do it that way because not only are there people that are coming out of jail or prison or people with addiction issues, the Dream Center is taking in people who are former gang members, survivors of human trafficking, people who have been in very chaotic environments. And if you're going to learn to live differently, you need to learn to live in a very structured way. So the Dream Center is where I got my first, I want to say 50 days of recovery that is now this 13 plus years. It'll be 14 in November that I'm in the midst of right now. So there was quite a bit of discipline at the Phoenix Dream Center.
So this is the one thing that I think that like a lot of people going through any kind of program where sweat equity is involved, like where you're exercising, like you mentioned earlier, the physical reaction you have to it. And the more you push through, the more you start to realize, oh, I'm getting better and better. And I could be wrong, but if we have addictive personalities and then we get involved in something like that, and now we can focus on that, it's almost like that starts to feel more like that addiction in that sense, or you just get full bore, like, hey, this is it. Like my day is structured. I'm investing this day, now day 2, day 3, day 4, you get day 10, 12, 15. Like I had an uncle that was the only thing that got him sober. I mean, he was late 50s, 60s when he finally sobered up, like fully. And part of that program was their long walks. Like you stay at this location, but you have to get up. They boot you out in the morning and you're doing these walks into the city.
Get outdoors.
There's certain appointments during the day and stuff. And then you got to walk back. And there's different phases. Like for him, everybody started out and the staff were all graduates of the program. So you weren't hiring
makes a difference.
You're not hiring some jackass off the street who's like, oh, I have a PhD, therefore I know everything.
I read this in a book, so I know how drug addiction is.
Yeah, and so he and I used to have, he's passed away, but he and I used to have these incredible conversations about just that, like his perspective, and like, you can't, and the way he would say is like, they'll call bullshit on you. They basically are like,
which is
you're
great.
full of shit. Yeah, you're full of shit. Get your stuff. You're getting ready to get booted out of the program. And so his thing was like, you start out in an open bay area. There's like these raggedy cots. You have nothing. You sleep in here with a bunch of other dudes.
It's good for you.
Yeah. And then after like a week or 2 or 3, then you get to move to a different location where you have like a half wall, like 3 foot high. He's like, so now you're a little bit separated from the first phase. And now you don't want to screw up and go back to phase 1 because now you're starting to get a little more seclusion and there's less people in the program because as it goes on,
skin in the game at this point. Yep.
Yeah. And so eventually the final steps, you are in it. You have your own room with you have a roommate. And basically by then you're leaning on one another to finish the program. And then once you finish the program, by then, usually, there's a high success rate. But I can remember being a patrol officer and, cruising through, I worked the southeast part of the city, which was pretty violent. But that main avenue going into the city is what these dudes would walk every morning. And you see them doing this walk.
There.
And I can remember thinking like, man, like there's like 40 or 50 dudes like just scattered out walking. And you catch them sometimes in the afternoon, but usually in the morning I could catch them because it's still early enough. But talking to him, it's like everybody has a story, everybody has trauma they're dealing with, and he's like, those walks also help you start to clear your
Yes,
thoughts. It's kind of like
absolutely.
you've turned off the TV or the radio or all the external
Put the
noise.
phone down.
Yeah, exactly. And all you're doing is dealing with the stuff, that either has happened to you or not, and so having his perspective helped me out a lot too, talking to people, either on patrol or when I was in a drug unit or even working violent crimes and stuff. You run across people that are victims and they're battling addictions and stuff, and you're like, well, if we can work on you and your addiction, you won't be in this motel, or you won't be, turning tricks, or you won't be, kind of beholden to this dude who you've been with for a year or two,
Oh
kind
yeah,
of thing. Like you start to
those
see,
unhealthy relationships.
yeah, you
Yes.
start to see like these different cogs in the wheel. Like you got a lot you got to focus on, kind of thing, as opposed to this stereotype that cops are just robots and they're walking around writing tickets, and some are, I know that. but for the most part, I mean, the last 10 to 15 years, officers are trying to do the right thing, and detectives, and we're able to kind of train them and teach them. Hey, there's a lot more going on, and you've got to constantly learn. So if you're talking to someone,
Oh yeah.
even on a drug arrest, and they're using, ask them, how the hell did this start? How did you
Absolutely.
first,
No one asks
yeah,
about their story. You're dealing with a
yeah,
human being, and you talk about, I know for officers, building rapport is really
yes,
important. And if
mm-hmm,
you talk to them like a human being and you ask them, how did this start? Nobody asks that. And they're
yeah,
like, wow, you are asking me something nobody asks me. You actually care to hear my story. And they are going to then be more likely to be respectful to you, nonviolent, however it
yeah,
is, like that. And as far as you're thinking about cops aren't robots and whatever, I got to work with a variety of police officers from Phoenix PD, Scottsdale PD, Mesa PD, Chandler. The
mm-hmm,
youth nonprofit mental health organization I worked at for the first 9 years of my career that I'm 12 years into now, the last 3 have been independent. They would hire current and former law enforcement officers to train on the organization's presentations on like drug prevention and things like that,
mm-hmm,
to go out to speak at schools and community groups and things like that. I developed the presentations. So the organization would have me sit down with the officers and train them
mm,
on our proprietary material. And so I got to see them in a very different, more long-term capacity than most people get to interact with them. And it was funny one day where I was sitting there and I found it saved time rather than training people one-on-one. If I could coordinate like 8 of them at once and we could train everybody at the same time, it worked way better for me than having to do 8 separate hours. So I
yeah,
was in there with them and we're getting ready. It's time for us to start. We're 5 minutes past our start time and they're all goofing around and joking with each other and laughing and whatever. And one of them says to me, like, I hope this is like, okay, like this is how we stay light and keep it, whatever.
mhm.
This is cop humor. And I said back to him, hey, if I'm sitting in a room with 8 police officers and nobody's reading me my Miranda rights, it's a good day.
It's a good day. That's what, like, we talk about it a lot, on the show and stuff like that, and that whole dark humor, cop humor, whatever. But it's a lifesaver, because a lot of people don't think about, like when I told that story earlier about the guy talking about shooting up and coagulating, all that stuff, blood clots. All of a sudden, my brain is going boom, 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 and it reverts right back to drug unit days, and then people that I worked with, meaning sources, not my teammates. I like them, but I'm saying, a lot of the sources that I worked were addicts, were people that were pinched, so to speak, and so they cooperate. And then you're trying to just work into dealers or gang members that are dealing. But and then I flash back to one of the sources I worked with, and he was just dealing with horrible stuff, and he and I would talk quite a bit. And then eventually, I mean, down the road, when he wasn't working anymore, we ran across each other during a different type of crime. And he was actually able to explain something to me that kept me from charging the wrong people
Wow.
in what we thought was potentially a crime pattern anyway. But when he and I used to have those talks when I was on the drug unit, and he started talking about being abused at a young age and what life was like,
Yep.
and things for, that he and his sister had been through. And a lot of people would say, oh, he's just tugging at your heartstrings. He's full of shit, whatever. I'm like, maybe he is. I'm a pretty good read though. Like, a lot of people used to confess to me about doing a lot of really violent crimes, and I'm pretty good at what I do. And I don't think he's full of shit. And actually, it doesn't help him in this situation. All he's doing is going out and buying, from different dealers, and then he's done. So he doesn't have to like manipulate me or do whatever. He's going to either produce or he's going to produce or he's not. But he and I can still have normal conversations like human beings, and I can learn from him and go, okay, he's explained to me what it was like, at 15 years old and starting to mainline heroin. You know what I mean? Like, okay,
yep.
How did that start? Anyway, point being, a lot of just horrible things that people are battling, and then, add in drugs or addiction. And it just keeps that cycle going.
It absolutely
I just hope,
does.
I hope for, police officers and stuff to always remember that some of the best parts of the job are having conversations with people, funny or not. I mean, like I've joked a lot with gang members, even like in moments when we probably should be stressed or worried, like, you crack a joke so that everybody understands we're not going to have a shootout, right? Like, you're going to keep your hands, on top of your head or on the wall or car or whatever. And I'm going to keep my pistol pointed at you or whatever.
This is how this is going to work.
Yeah. And then, we're going to laugh and joke about this. And then whatever small charges we don't have to deal with, we're not going to. You know what I mean? Like, But I do love the idea, like you were saying, about creating presentations and things like that and having officers doing that. I don't know. I dig it. I still train officers and deputies and agents, and I like where things are going right now. You know what I mean? Like in the current trend in police work in that sense. The proactive side's got to come back on a lot of this stuff, and you do have to have units going after violent drug dealers.
Absolutely.
Not what we call that low hanging fruit, where you go out there, you stop a car, and you're recovering, dosage units, and people are strung out or battling stuff. Like, you got to deal with that. I realize that, but the focus, the money, the resources, the skill should be honed in on very good teams, and that's what they do. And if it takes them a week or two to get the most violent drug dealers off the street with really solid cases, then do that. Like, don't
be it.
Yeah. Like, that's the thing. So now let me back up again, back to the jail days. Was that the first time in Durango? Was that the first time you had been incarcerated?
It was the second. So oddly enough, I was arrested 2 or 3 years apart on the same calendar day, November 28th. And in between those two arrests on November 28th, I broke my hand in a drunken incident, November 28th. So there was something about that day for me that was like apparently not good. I had been arrested once before, but that last time, so the first time I had been arrested and basically saw a judge and got, I was released on my own reconnaissance. I was only like with a date to appear and things like that. This last time, I was booked in and bail was set, and I didn't have the money. And then family's like, no, you're going to sit there. We're not going to get you out. Like, this needs to stop. And so rather than just going through 4th Avenue jail in downtown Phoenix, where you go what they call the horseshoe or the matrix through the booking process, one holding cell to the next until you go through the whole process, I actually got booked into Durango jail, got moved into building D7, Pod D, and was there for a bit, and got to have the Joe Arpaio experience. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
His jail system was pretty well known, not only nationally, but internationally. But that was the first and the last time actually being in Durango.
So I know what you're talking about in his jail. Explain to people some of the stuff that either you experienced that he was still doing or the staff was still doing, or what they've been known for in the past.
So what he was most known for was not the jail that I went to. He was most known for what was called Tent City, where Tent City was an outdoor jail. And I live in Phoenix. And so in Phoenix in the summer, the tents in Tent City, they like the news crews every summer would go down and do a story from there, and they'd have a thermometer in the tents. And it was like, it would like in the tents where the air's not moving, they would show like 140 and things like that. So he was known for Tent City. I mean, that was the biggest thing there. He removed coffee from the jail, so no coffee. He made all the inmates wear pink boxers, which, you know, people were like, is this an emasculating thing? Like, what's he doing? But he just had everybody wear pink boxers. Those were the biggest things that I can seem to recall there. So I didn't get the full Joe Arpaio experience because I didn't go to the tents. But I went to Durango, which has since been torn down. I don't know if they found asbestos or something like that. But that got torn down. And it was enough of the experience for me to not want to go back. And it's not just the negative things that are there. It's all the good stuff that isn't there. All the stuff that you appreciate and enjoy or take for granted is not there. And that's makes me think back to what you were saying about in that treatment facility where you move from the bay to the partially private room to the private room. You start to gain an appreciation for those things. And it's like some of the good that did come out of me going to jail there is waking up and thinking, I have lost everyone good in my life because this is it. This is the last mistake. And I messed up bad. I mean, I messed up bad that night. And thinking it's all over. And I'm in there, I'm going through withdrawals in my cell. I'm sweating, I'm shaking, I'm vomiting. And it's in this place of all places that it's coming to me. I had such amazing people in my life, and I betrayed them. I had such wonderful opportunities, and I wasted them. I had so much time, and I didn't take advantage of it. And it burned in so deeply. And I was like, God, I will do anything to come back from this. I will do whatever I need to do to never be this person again. And I made myself a promise to make my faith, my family, and my recovery priorities. And I finally kept a promise after being someone that broke promises for a very long time. So that started in Durango. But what's important, as much as pain can help change people. What set that into stone, into concrete for me, was the grace that I was shown by people who were like, okay, yeah, you messed up, but you're proving to us your actions have started to match up. So we're going to start to allow you back in bit by bit, and you need to continue to prove it to us, which I completely understand.
That to me, when it's like that forgiving hand kind of thing, you know, when someone, you either let them down or you see it, like I would see it on the street a lot with people who would run and want to fight, you know, and then you get them in cuffs and then they're like, oh, man, I messed up. Like, yeah, you did. Like fool, you're fighting yourself. You're not fighting me.
Exactly.
Like you have a lot of stuff you're dealing with. We're going to the jail. You know what I mean? Like we'll talk about stuff on the way. maybe you can get a low bond, maybe not, but like, I'm not mad at you. Be mad at yourself. You just
Yeah.
accrued
Oh
a
yeah.
bunch of additional charges, and you do find out that like dudes like down the road, because cops who work very violent areas or very active areas, you see the same people. You call them frequent flyers, repeat
Yep.
offenders, habituals, whatever you want to call it. You see the same dudes over and over, and this goes on for years and years. And you have those conversations, and sometimes you go, man, you remember when you were like 15, you swung on me, or you were like whatever, 18, you bailed out the back door. And so you can have these like funny stories, and then other times you can talk about, yeah, like, man, every time I pulled up on the block, you mean mug me. You'd want to like, go toe to toe, and even the old heads would laugh at you, because you're such a young guy and so angry. But like, man, I never did anything wrong to you. I didn't. No, you're right. You're right. It's like, what the hell did you have going on?
Yep.
And usually it's just that. It's like that self-destructive mode.
Oh yeah.
Guys screw up and they know they're going to jail, and so then it's like any little thing that they can, they capitalize on it, or they want to fight. Then they want to, let all that anger out, and really they're just pissed because maybe their girlfriend or something like, don't go out tonight with your boys. You're going to end up with a gun charge, or you're going to end up with this and that. And next thing you know, they're knee deep in a shooting investigation, and dudes will just be shaking their head going, man, like, my girl told me don't leave the house tonight. Like, yeah, and why did you leave? You're 25 years old. Why'd you leave the house? Because you still want to hang on to the glory days of hanging out with your buddies. And she's right. And who's always there for you? She is. Who's the first person you go call when you get downtown? Her. Yeah. Who's probably going to put money on your books? Her. Who ain't going to put money on your books?
Your boys.
Dudes I was with. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And it sucks. And then, you have those conversations. These guys are like, yeah, you're right. But then there's like a silver lining to it too. You run into guys down the road and they've cleaned up, or they've gotten away from that. The gang is the same thing. Guys join a gang and they get addicted to that lifestyle, that either presence, that idea that there's power in numbers, and
power
that sort
is a
of
big
thing.
one.
And then they go to jail, for the first or second time, or when they start to realize like, oh, everybody doesn't really have my back. And
nope. Where are they?
Yeah.
What,
yeah.
When you're up, they're all around. When you're down, everybody disappears. You mentioned, by the way, when you're like, sometimes you see them years later and they did get cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
I have the police report from the night I was arrested. I know who the two, actually 6 officers responded. But the 2 main ones that I dealt with, I know who they are. And I've been working on a letter. When I email them, it's easy to figure out what their email address is because City of Phoenix email addresses all pretty much work the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And been intending to write them a letter. I already wrote one to the judge in my case to let them know, here's what's happened since then. This story has a good ending.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you've seen a million times the stories that never end, or they have a bad ending. The guy that you dealt with for years, you find him dead in the street from a gunshot. And you see all the negative all the time. But how often, probably not often enough, do you get someone that comes back to you, or you run across them and they're like, hey, let me tell you what's different now.
Yeah.
And it's so important for working in the field that you work in. You talked about how that dark humor is part of what keeps you sane. You have to do that. What also would help is knowing that there's good that's come out of calls that you've responded to. I mean, of course, there's always good. You're removing violent offenders from the street. But on a personal level, that there's that person that's like, I finally got the message. Here's what's changed since the last time you saw me. So I'm actually pretty much done with the email, and I'm going to fire it off to them. It's now, nearly 14 years later. I hope they're both still with Phoenix PD, but if I get the bounce back, I'll know otherwise. So.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing is too, I'll tell you what, if you can't track them down that way, we'll talk offline. My wife and I are usually pretty good at tracking some people down.
Awesome.
She's very good at open source stuff, and we'll meaning, in other words, we can find somebody to get them a letter. If,
by the way, one of the guys that wasn't the 2 main guys, he was a third one whose name was on the report. He and I are LinkedIn contacts now, which I was like, this is, you talk about like, the crazy changes in recovery, the great, amazing, ridiculous things that happen. That's a full circle moment. I sent him an invite and then sent him a message, explained who I am, and then sent him a link to my story on Silverladder to show here's what's different now. You're not being contacted again by a guy that's still doing the same stuff.
Yeah. Because that's the thing. It's the running joke is always in the police world. If you're out in public and somebody comes up to you and they say, "Hey, do you remember me?" And immediately, if you've dealt with really bad people, like
Yeah.
you're going through that mental file, so to speak, just like,
Where are
is
we
this
headed
somebody,
here?
who wanted to kill me? Is this, what is this? And usually, you read micro expressions on their face, and often people, it's because they're nervous, and they're coming up and being like, "Hey, do you remember me?" And sometimes you can misread it and you're like, "All right, they're a threat." But people will say, "Hey, you charged me with whatever drug paraphernalia, and we had a talk that night, and it's the first time I've ever been arrested," or whatever, or I lost my job around that time. I was smoking crack. I got clean. I just wanted you to know I'm not a bad person. Like, yeah, like I know you're not. I had a guy one time. I was on patrol. I had a bunch of really good patrol officers I worked with. So, I mean, there were times when we had downtime, we had a lot of abandoned houses the dudes would sell out of and stuff like that. So what you would do is you'd sneak around at night in between dispatches, because you're on patrol. So you could be responding to a car crash, you could be responding to a shoplifting, a shooting, whatever. But then when you get some downtime, or there were certain hours where we would go proactive, meaning you don't respond to the radio, you kind of go looking for stuff to get into. But we would go and clear abandoned houses and catch people in there, and you also catch people with a lot of violent arrest warrants and stuff, and they're hiding out, so they're using abandoned places. You know how it is. So, but the squad I was with, we were really good at doing stuff like that, and I always liked that they were really hands-on. We do really good car extractions when we had guys with guns, or had guys in car stops that wanted to fight or whatever. But it's one of those things where now I forgot my damn point of my story, dude. Shh.
It had started with, you have people come up to you years later and like, do you remember me?
Yes. So yeah, the reason I forget sometimes too is I can't use real names.
Oh yeah, I get that entirely.
So then, like, so anyway, what triggered that was one of my buddies I was like really good with, and we worked almost our entire career, different assignments. We were always together. He and I we respond to this call. And it's basically a woman is called and said that her husband, they're arguing and fighting, and that he's basically lost control. And of course, dispatch always asks, "Are there any weapons involved?" Yep. And she said, I think her exact comments were, "I think he may have a knife." Not he has a knife, I saw it, anything like that. Now it gets translated over the radio to us because we're responding to a hot call of, domestic violence call, not a lot of information. Here's the location. Male is still on scene, potentially has a knife. We get there, we make entry, blah, 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 guns up, all that stuff. He's completely clueless as to what's going on, because apparently the argument earlier was not that bad in his point of view.
Okay.
But now he's staring at two police officers with pistols drawn, giving him commands to come down his hallway in his apartment and lay down flat in his living room. So he's walking down the hall. He's complying. He's got his hands up. He's just like, what is going on? Like, none of this makes sense. Like, why are you in my house? What's going on? And so we're giving him commands. Go ahead and lay down, lay down, lay down. And he's not listening. So of course we do our code talking where one's going to holster and go ahead and make contact. And so I holster, I go to just go ahead and grab his arm and lock it out, because he's not fully understanding when we say lay on the ground, you got to go to the ground. So I go to lock his arm out. He turns and basically is trying to face my partner, that's not good. So I go ahead and lock his arm up, take him straight to the ground. We wrestle a little bit, and I ask him something as we're kind of fighting. whatever, like what branch were you in, or something like that. It was basically a military question, very quick, because for whatever reason it popped in my head. I felt like he was prior service, and he said Navy, Navy, Navy. I was in the Navy, So by then, got him cuffed. I'd be like, all right, man, then I'm prior Army. Like, I'm treating you with respect, but you gotta follow what we're saying. We got to go through through all of this, and we're all going to be good. Everybody's safe. Everybody's good. He's like, no, I got you. He calms down. We get him outside. We start to figure out what's going on. And there may have been a little bit of exaggeration on the other person's part. He knew nothing about a knife. He's like, I don't have a knife. I didn't threaten anybody with a knife. We're arguing, whatever, So we know that they don't need to be together at that point, because it's gotten so bad that we got involved, but no assault, just arguing, just verbal stuff, but heated enough to where she was worried. Anyway, because I was trained in CIT, like crisis intervention, and we had mental health facilities in our city that we could transport people directly there, voluntary or involuntary. So I had the power, if I observed certain things, that I could do involuntary. But as I was talking to him, and he kept harping on alcohol. And he was saying, in the Navy, I was somebody. Like, I'm a nobody now.
Okay.
And he's like, I got a wife. I got 2 kids or teenagers. Like, most of my time has been in the military, and I'm trying to make ends meet, and nothing seems to be working, and he keeps harping back on alcohol. And so I just said, look, dude, this is the thing. You can use me as a taxi service. I'll take you straight to this mental health facility. I'll walk you in. I'll sit with you, or you can just go in on your own. You're there completely voluntary. Talk to them about what you started talking to me about, and maybe it'll help. I don't know what resources you're going to need, or what you're battling, but this situation that you're in right now can't continue. It potentially is going to get worse. And I even gave him my phone number, and it was a personal cell phone. We back then on patrol, you didn't have city issued cell phones, not for patrol officers. So I just gave him my cell phone, like, hey man, like, good luck to you. I'm the patrol officer in that area. Maybe we'll cross paths, sometimes not, not on this type of call, And I don't know, man, it was a couple days later, that dude calls me, or maybe it was a couple of weeks actually, because when he called, it was like he had to remind me of who he was for a second. And I was like, oh yeah, dude, I remember. And he's like, hey, I got a job, man. I'm delivering food products, and it's got benefits. It's got money. I think like his supervisor was prior military. Like, he was starting to feel like his old self, like a man again, And he said, man, I appreciate it so much. I'm working on my alcohol stuff. And I don't know, we just had a good conversation for 20, 30 minutes that I was like, all right, like, that's cool. Like, I dig that. Where we went from, my buddy and I were like, later we had talked about, like, the guy didn't have it in his eye that he wanted to hurt anybody, but all of his actions where he's not cooperating, so it's like one of those lessons in, technically there could have been a lot more to the use of force in that sense, or maybe not, but that way. But I don't know, man, both of us were like, there was just something in our gut and in his eyes and stuff that he was confused, and like he was not the threat that was kind of portrayed to us.
Asking the military question was so smart, because it sounds like you got his attention long enough to kind of like a pause there, and you mentioned the CIT, verbal de-escalation can be a very powerful thing. Now I understand that it doesn't always work. I watch all the time, probably daily. There's a YouTube channel called Police Activity. It's all body cam videos. And I have seen situations where verbal de-escalation has been tried. Everything has been tried. 15 chances have been given, and it's not working. And you've got someone that's just amping up even further. But in the cases where it does work like that, you got his mind off of whatever the conflict was for a moment. And he's like, Branch, oh, I'm Navy. And then obviously this is someone that was proud of his service, because once you had him cuffed, he was like, I was somebody. Yeah. And it's like, that's that intelligent, the policing, the tactics, the strategy right there, that meant that you and your partner didn't have to go as physical as you may have.
Yeah, and I think too with the military now, we would also deal with some idiots, that were like young soldiers and they're drunk and you know what I mean? Like usually that's they're trying to prove something. You know what I mean?
Testosterone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so then, and they're like, I'm into whatever, fill in the blank, whatever unit, and you were like, yeah, well then act like it. You know what I mean? Like you're out here basically making a damn fool of yourself and you're going to catch extra charges. Now, the young soldiers, going through stuff too, but sometimes I don't have a lot of patience when people puff their chest up.
Oh, yeah.
Or act like you owe me something. Like that was another thing we used to hear a lot. If you dealt with dudes and they would be like, well, I did this for my country. I did that. I was like, okay, cool. Well, then how about do this for your country? Don't accrue charges tonight. Like, don't try to race your buddy to the jail. Like, just go have fun. Don't pick fights. Don't try to prove yourself, cool. Just enjoy life kind of thing. But the question too, sometimes this is for officers and detectives out there, like anything you key in on with the person, especially in a crisis, and you can ask them a question about it, and it's something that you feel like they want you to acknowledge, then do it. I mean, that's the thing. Like it's the same thing. I think when people are going through things like that, and like he was saying, I used to be somebody.
Yep.
That's the thing. And for some people, there's always like the running joke about First Blood, like the Rambo movie. Like when I was a kid, I loved First Blood because as a kid, it was just like this, wild dude fighting cops and running through the woods and stuff. But then when I was in the Army, I had a platoon sergeant that would quote the whole final scene in the movie. And then when you see it as an adult and you're like, oh, it kind of chokes you up. You know what I mean? Like towards the end, because he gives a speech very similar to that. Like he's saying, I was in charge of $1 million, worth of equipment and soldiers, and now I can't even get a job at I think it says like at a car wash or something.
And that loss, that feeling of loss, and that feeling of lack of purpose fuels a lot of unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of people have fragile egos in general, and when they go into the service, and they can even excel at certain things, it just doesn't fix that ego issue. No. I will say the First Blood novel that movie's based on, it's a novel written or published in 1973. You like to read, it's literature, dude. It is not like dime store fiction. Like incredible book.
It's interesting what that came from, the quality of that book, where that and the first movie, what the franchise became later was almost cartoonish. It was like just super over the top. Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and then especially I think there was a third one that was made.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It reminds me of the difference in the Rocky franchise. The first Rocky movie was a well-written, well-acted, it was a story. It wasn't just people throwing haymakers. What it became by Rocky 3 with Clubber Lang and Thunder Lips with Hulk Hogan and whatever really changed from it. But yes, First Blood, the first thing in that series, and the book that it's based on are really well done.
Yeah. The book, there have been a few people I've talked to about that book. And it's one of those that you've got all of the individual versus society, individual versus individual, individual versus self, like all of that. And the character Rambo in the book, I mean, is a pretty violent dude and pretty disgruntled. And so that's all it takes is like these two egos, these two people butting heads, and neither one of them will give an inch. Like they're just locked into it, until the death. So I don't know, but I say all that to say, dealing with people in general, battling their own issues, but then introduce alcohol or drugs.
Oh,
and it is one of those things that in America, I used to always think like, man, I wonder what America, like what our crime rate would be like if, people didn't abuse alcohol or, the invention of certain drugs that are
Yep.
just, like what level of domestic violence would go down,
Oh, significantly.
right?
I mean, you've seen it. I don't need to tell you what percentage of DV calls you went to
Yeah.
involved alcohol. It's probably the vast majority.
Yeah, that's why I say it, and people like laugh at it a little bit, but like if someone's gonna drink some wild turkey, right, or some kind of like hard
Mad
liquor,
Dog,
Mad Dog, yeah, or Cisco back in the day, or whatever.
Thunderbird.
Yeah, if somebody's gonna drink like some really hard stuff or smoke some weed, all day long, I'm like, I'll pack the bowl for them. You know what I mean? Like,
Vast difference between the
because
two.
yeah, I never remember fighting dudes that had just smoked some weed. Usually that's when you catch somebody slipping, like they've gone and done some stupid stuff, and then they're hanging out smoking weed, and you're like, oh yeah, ski mask in the car, like yeah,
Eating the
zip
bag of
ties.
Doritos they stole.
Yeah. But man, like alcohol, like straight
Oh.
up hard liquor. Oh man,
That made me the worst version of myself that I have ever been. And I'm not saying the other things didn't cause destruction, the other substances. The worst version of myself that I've ever been was because of alcohol. And again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I did it. I made my choices. That's on me. But that certainly fueled that behavior.
Yeah, my mom used to tell me when I was young that was the one thing where my dad would flip a switch kind of thing. And my dad was like easygoing, always had a beer in his hand, hardworking dude. Always told funny stories. Also one of those guys you didn't want to make mad or mess around. Like he could fight. But she said that when, early on in their marriage, he would drink, like she called it brown liquor, but basically anything, you know what I mean? Like she's like, he would go hang out, at the car wash with his buddy that was in a soul band and fights. They'd go out and get in fights, or, he'd come home and just be mean, as she'd say, like mean as a snake. Like drinking beer, he never got that way. I don't
Whiskey, a hard liquor. Again, it's just an acceleration. You can get into trouble that much faster.
Yeah. And so even like when I was a kid, then starting to kind of realize, so there's just different levels. Like some people can handle, whatever, this type of alcohol, but not this other type or whatever. But either way, man, all of that stuff, I wish for everybody that's ever had to battle it, that it never existed in that sense. But it's also interesting that people can drink it and they not become addicted, or they don't,
absolutely. And that's why I don't begrudge other people, even as somebody whose life was incredibly negatively affected by alcohol, and I really harmed other people because of it. I have no issue with people who can go out and do it in moderation or do it however, and they're not harming anyone else in the process. Man, more power to you. I wish I could do that. I can't, and I proved it to myself. And so that's the kind of thing where, not in addition to that, in my own recovery, and I know a lot of people in recovery can't do this, I don't have an issue being around people doing it. I'm not tempted to do it. I love the fact that if I want to go see a band at a bar, I can go do that, and it's just it's just out of my vision. It's not something I have to participate in.
Yeah. What are some of your best, or what are some of the best concerts or shows you've been to?
Wow. Well, you mentioned Minor Threat. I didn't get to see Minor Threat, but speaking of Ian MacKaye, I got to see Fugazi for $5. Fugazi in 2001 was absolutely incredible. My favorite band of all time is a pretty obscure 90s Americana alt country band called Grantley Buffalo. I got to see them at the Largo in LA. Let me think. Actually a rock band, 90s rock band that I ended up becoming friends with called Caroline Spine. They were kind of known. They had a single called Sullivan that got some airplay in the 90s. Just would constantly just play a blistering, all-out, amazing show. One of the earliest shows I ever saw, I went to go see Screaming Trees, Soul Asylum, and Spin Doctors. Soul Asylum, played a show that to this day absolutely stands out in my mind. And then the next one that comes to mind, and I'll leave the list with this. Just a couple weeks ago, got to see Ryan Adams, not Brian Adams. We
Yeah,
discussed
correct.
this through DMs.
Yeah.
Ryan Adams at the Orpheum in Phoenix, playing not only one set, but 2 acoustic sets. He had acoustic guitar, he had a piano, he plugged in at one point. Those were absolutely phenomenal shows. But yeah, that Fugazi show, paying $5 to get to go see a legend, and they just put it all out there. It was amazing.
I remember when their first album, 13 Songs, came out, and I had, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the name of the band. So I had Rites of Spring, which was some of their members. And there was one other like project that Ian did, I think right before Fugazi. Because I used to order a lot from Discord Records. So back then, just straight up mail order.
Yep.
Mail them some cash, and then you get, 3 or 4 records that,
And they kept it affordable.
Oh, yeah. That was, okay. And let me say this too. You're right. So I had heard an interview a long time ago where Ian was basically saying money is fuel. So as long as you kind of check that, like you don't become so excessively greedy that everything you're doing is all for the name of profit, then money is good. Like you use it as fuel. You can, put out records, you can do things like that. And you're right. It was always affordable. I mean, I think it was stamped, like printed on the actual cassettes, like $5. Like you could, well, I guess you could, if you were a distributor, slap
trying
a
to
sticker
mark it
over
up.
it. Yeah.
They wanted to make sure that distributors and record stores were not doing that. Ian is someone, you talk about staying ideologically consistent. He sounds like the same person now as he sounded like in the early 1980s. And I have to acknowledge that. I respect that so much. There's so many people that came out of the gate saying, here's who I am, here's what I'm about. And we found out pretty quickly that that's not who that person was.
Yeah.
Ian is Ian, and he's always been.
Yeah. And Discord, it's funny. I have to like dig them back out. I've got like letters and stuff from back in the day. I've got a postcard from Fugazi and stuff. So I was always like writing bands, one, to just talk about music. And then sometimes, hey, if you're playing in this area, can I do an interview? Can I do whatever? Because I had a fanzine. So it's like one of those things with Discord. So many bands were coming out of that DC area and writing letters and people, responding back and being like, hey, check out Jawbox, up here, like whatever it is. Oh, okay. And then you check it out. And for $5, I mean, I wasn't the richest kid in the world, but I always worked, starting at like, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old, 12 years old, cutting grass and working tobacco. So I always had cash. So I'd order records constantly and cassette tapes. But I always loved that about Discord, is that I could afford those albums. And they're still like Fugazi. You can go back and listen. The production's incredible. They're incredible. Like, and so many other bands out of DC and stuff, or others that are still touring now, like Sick of It All. And people, someone asked me not too long ago, and they were like, hey, what's your favorite hardcore band? I'm like, I can't really pick a favorite hardcore band, but if I had to say who's lasted a test of time, one of them would be Sick of It All, because every album is incredible. And yet, the sounds are a little different, and they just get better and better. But they're still doing it, 30 something years, I think.
That's hard to do.
Playing shows. And it's crazy because the average person may go, I have no idea who Sick of It All is. And then you can send them a video of them playing a venue of thousands of people, either in America or Europe, because the scene was huge over there. But they're still, from what I understand, still the same guys that they were. They're always putting the music first. They're always putting their family and friends first. And that, the whole New York hardcore scene means something to them.
Yep.
And so they don't ever want to like, whatever, bring shame or disrespect on it, and just do what they're doing. So like you're saying, like with Ian, it's like at a young age, I think that guy just saw life in very clear cut. Hey, this is how it is.
Very black and white.
This is
Yep.
what I support. And it's funny, like the whole straight edge thing, because, if I even mention it, a lot of times there's negative connotation because that whole movement had gotten so negative and so
it got hijacked.
Yeah, exactly. And so when people say like, "Oh, you were straight edge," like, I like straight edge bands.
You got to clarify.
Yeah, but it's like I was just me, and I definitely wasn't running around telling people don't do this, because everybody I hung out with were doing that. I mean, I'm wearing like a Youth of the Day shirt at one point, and I'm hanging out with people, long hair, watching Beavis and Butthead, and they're listening to like Carcass and Sepultura and stuff like that.
Wow.
And they're smoking these, weed from these bongs that are like 3 or 4 foot tall. And they're trying to like pass me the bong. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. Like, I don't smoke. And they're like, all right. Like, basically good. We don't need another freeloader. And I could hang out. And
that's perfect to be able to do that. And then also not be condemning them for their thing. It'd be different if they were doing that and then they go out and they drive and they kill somebody or whatever.
Yeah.
My big thing is if you are not harming people in the process, what you're doing is not my business and I'm not going to worry about it. And that's where, like we were talking about, I feel like the straight edge movement got hijacked not only by people who would like tear down people who would drink a beer or whatever. There were incidents that I had heard about, and I can't visually verify this, I wasn't there, of straight edge people attacking people who were drinking or using. And it's like, it's like you're starting to become kind of the thing that you hate. Like you've lost the plot at that point. That's, someone who's straight edge in that I don't drink, I don't use drugs, I don't smoke and whatever, I take care of my body, man, go for it. Absolutely. But let other people make their decisions up into the point where it is harming someone else.
Yeah, it became basically straight up fascism. And a lot of that was documented out of the Boston scene. They kind of are getting a lot of credit now in retrospect for creating an environment like that where, clusters of guys would just go stomp people for drink. Now, it started out, from what I remember, like the whole phrase, not in my backyard. Like, you can't come sell drugs in our area or near our venues where the bands are playing.
Keeping your street clean.
Yeah, so supposedly they started out like targeting drug dealers, but then it got to be, oh, that person's drinking a beer, boom. Oh, they're smoking a cigarette, and it's that gang mob mentality, and it's fascism.
Yeah, you're a sheep at that point.
Yeah, exactly. You are now being like guided into a cycle of violence, and it's not good. Like, people aren't going to not drink because there's a band of dummies running around, stomping people's heads in. It's weird. I can remember talking to, different bands back then when a lot of this stuff took off and got so militant, and bands who were, in the hardcore scene, and they're like, yeah, like, I don't know what's going on with these certain bands, but man, they're singing about basically setting places on fire and jumping people, like, just like, the scene's never been about that. It's more about just personal choice. And, if Murphy's Law can go on tour with H2O, it's like, like Murphy's Law is known for drinking and partying. H2O is, known for positivity and not getting into that.
Yep.
And they can all hang out. Like, here's
that's a great
message.
example.
Like, it is, dude. And both bands, like Murphy's Law and H2O, are great guys, nice guys. Like, that's the way it should be. And that's the way.
Absolutely.
I think that's the power of music. It's a good way to wrap up, because you and I could talk all day long, Shane.
Yes.
I appreciate your time. Tell everybody like what all you got going on and how they can reach out and talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Silverladder.com is my website. I'm actually going to be launching a Silverladder podcast pretty soon, where we're going to be talking about recovery, mental health, behavioral health, but it's not just limited to that. It's people that have powerful life stories. It is a storytelling podcast. I love spoken narrative. I love storytelling. Two of my favorite human beings ever in the history of the planet are my dad and my uncle, who are the two best storytellers I've ever known. I love stories of real life, people that have overcome obstacles, people who are out there right now doing amazing things, because we hear so much about all this horrible stuff. I want to share some good things that are happening as well, but also the reality of dark things that have happened and how did people rise above those things. In addition to doing the podcast, I go out and I speak at schools, churches, community groups, corporations. I do 1-hour presentations where I will speak to parents or school faculty or grandparents on substance use prevention for youth. Talking about what's out there, what the dangers are, what the symptoms look like. How do we prevent kids from doing this? How do we help kids who are doing this? Answering Q&A, using my professional and personal experience. I also go out and I speak on suicide prevention and intervention. I speak on youth mental health. I go out and I share my personal story of addiction and recovery. And then also what I'm doing is, and by the way, those presentations, I can do them virtually. I can do them through Zoom as well. And then I'm doing peer support and recovery support. I'm doing peer support where I will sit down. I'm not a licensed counselor, and I tell them that right up front. But what I am is someone that has worked in the field of mental and behavioral health for 12 years. I am certified as a peer support specialist, and I am someone who lived that path of substance use for 20 years, 14 years in recovery, nearly 14 years in recovery. And if men who are in recovery want some support and some help, and let's figure out a recovery plan, or you're actively using and you want to quit, how do I do that? I will work with them on that. And then I will also do family support for families with addicted loved ones or families with loved ones in recovery. How do we best support them when they're in recovery? Or if they're still using, how do we get them to go to treatment? How do we not enable them? What do we do? What do we not do? So I do those things, the podcast, I write articles and blogs. Everything is contained at the domain name silverladder.com. And then you can also find me on Instagram under the name Silverladder. Brian, this has been absolutely incredible. I mean, we could have gone another 4 hours, but I got to eventually let my family back out so they can eat breakfast. Really appreciate you sharing your time with me.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Take care, buddy.